Every year there's new people into the garden world and the homesteading world. And we get some messages and questions about seed starting indoors. And while this isn't our typical situation for seed starting, goes to show that you can do it anywhere. While we're building our house, we're currently in my dad's basement until the house build is done. But while we're not starting onions and leeks and stuff like we usually do, it is time to start the tomatoes and peppers. So I figured I would take you along today and just give you a few tips or pointers about starting mainly tomatoes and peppers, but some herbs and other things that would be started at this time of the year. So basically, you don't want to start too soon. While you can, you ideally want to be transplanted out into your garden space before your peppers and tomatoes are blooming. So if you're a bit early, you can pinch your beginning blooms, and then they'll put more energy into their root system. But you just don't want to go too soon unless you plan on keeping them in like pots or indoors. So for me, we're about 11 weeks out from our average last frost. And most tomatoes you want to do around 8 weeks. We don't use heat mats, so we're actually start just a little bit early because they can take a bit longer to germinate. So basically, when you start out, you need to get the right soil consistency before you even start seeding. So I'm just going to show you that. So basically, you want to pre-moisten your soil. So you don't want it to be sopping wet. When you squeeze, you don't really want to see any water, but you do want it to hold its form. So this is just when you start planting into your cells. Your seedling, ideally, your seedling is you want it twice as deep as the width. So whatever the width of your seed is, you want to take 2 times that and put it down into the soil. So you don't want your peat moss or whatever you're seed starting in to float up higher when you water. So if you pre-moisten your soil, that will keep it at the level that you want it and not constantly be covering over the seedling. Only have so much energy to actually get out of the soil. So if your soil is too clumpy or too wet, it might look like the seed never even germinated. When it did, it just died down in the soil before it could get out of the soil. So height is semi-important. And then another question we always get asked is how much? And that varies really on each family, depends on what you're going to, if you're going to be canning or just for fresh eating, or if you're going to start some extras to sell, or however you're going to determine that. We usually do quite a few tomatoes, some for canning, and then other ones just for fresh eating and slicers, that kind of thing. So we do slicers, cherry, and then for canning purposes. This year, we're mainly just going to be trying to use up a lot of our open packages. So we're going to have quite a variety of different seeds throughout the garden, but lots of them will just have the same purpose. So for paste tomatoes, it's going to mainly be Roma, although we do have some Amish paste as well. And then we always do cherry tomatoes for the kids, and then just our slicer tomatoes. And you can use slicer tomatoes for canning as well. And for peppers, we do a variety as well. We do hot peppers, sweet peppers, and then things like cayenne pepper, paprika pepper for spices. So other things to think about for seed starting is your space, how much space you have indoors. So these guys are basically going to be inside your house until after your last frost. So for us, that is around June 8th to 9th is our average last frost in the spring. You really want to wait until your soil temperature is plus 15 degrees Celsius. Upwards of 20, 21 degrees is ideal for transplanting out tomatoes and peppers. If you plant them out when it's cooler soil temperatures, it's actually going to stunt the plant. So it's not really going to be too much of a benefit for you to start super early and then try to rush to plant them outside. You can use certain things like poly covers, or if you're planting into a greenhouse, that might be different. Just check your soil temperatures. Don't rush it. We start in these smaller cell trays because of our space. So they're actually pretty small cells there compared to my finger. There's 200 slots in here, and we just seed one seed into each spot. So these are just your standard 10 by 20. They fit into the 10 by 20 watering trays. However, we don't really like using the watering trays because it holds it up all along the edges of these trays, but the middle actually sinks down in once you place it into the water. So our middle usually gets too moist and our edges are too dry. So we actually set these onto, they're like car mats. You get them for the back of your SUV. They have a lip that's about 2.5 inches. And so we set all of our trays like this with these small cells into that car mat, and that helps save us a ton on space. Lots of people will also just plant like multiple seeds into like a 3-inch pot or a 4-inch pot or even a 6-inch pot, and then they will pick them out and transplant them into their own pots. You can also use red solo cups for planting multiples or for up potting. So typically we'll plant into these 200 cells, and then the seedlings germinate in here, and when they come up, once they get their first set of true leaves is when we will plant them either into like 6 cells together or into 3-inch pots or red solo cups, and then they'll stay in those cups for about 4 to 6 weeks. It kind of just depends on the year and the plant growth, but about 4 to 6 weeks they're generally good in something this size. And then at that point we still have another stretch before they can actually get outside, so that's when they all go into 6-inch pots or bigger. So we have some 1-gallon pots, so they're 6-inch but they're deep, and I'll use those mainly because I want to promote that root growth. So you want the more room for their roots. So if your tomatoes get a little laggy, it's not a big deal. Even pepper plants, you can sink the stem down in deeper into the soil, and for tomatoes they'll send off air roots, side roots, and it will actually help stabilize the plant better. For peppers, they don't so much send off roots, but it doesn't bother them when they're young to have their stems under soil. So if they've gotten a bit leggy, you can correct that by sinking them deeper into like a solo cup or something like that, deeper into it to help stabilize the stem. However, with peppers, once they're older, like once their stem starts going almost kind of like woody, they actually won't like their stem to be covered in the soil, so keep that in mind. I guess lights is another big thing that we get questions about. So we use LED shop lights. I think ours are like 16 or 18 watts. They are, but it's not so much the watts. For us, it's the watts because we're moving over to solar. But for your plants, it's going to be the lumen and the kelvins that you need to think about. So you want minimum 3,000 lumen, and you want to get as close to 6,500 Kelvin as you can. So our shop lights fit on our grow rack, which is 4 feet long. And in our hood cover, there's 2 bulbs. So when you're adding bulbs, your lumens add and your kelvins don't. So our bulbs are 3,200 lumen and 5,500 Kelvin, and they hold 2 bulbs. So our plants are actually getting about 6,400 lumens and the 5,500 Kelvin. And you want to keep them about a couple inches above your soil or the tops of the plants. If you find they're kind of scorching the plants, you can move them up a little bit more, but the lower lumens and kelvins you have, the closer they need to be. The higher lumen and kelvins, the further away from the plant they can be. And then other things to help prevent laggy is you can like run your hand over your plants every time you pass. That will help strengthen their stems. You can run a fan kind of pointed in their general direction. So you don't want like a full blast leaning them over constantly like a hard wind, but like a light breeze. So if you just point it from further away into the general direction like a light breeze, it'll just move them around enough to help strengthen the stems. Keeping the lights in the proper place will also help with laggy, and then they'll bulk more into their stem and their root ball. I guess that's kind of covers everything. For us in our zone in Alberta, zone 3, our soil temperature really doesn't get up to temperature until the beginning of June. So even if your average last frost day is at, say, end of May, because we are kind of in a cold pocket, we have a really short grow season right where we are. It's 79 days, but other parts of Alberta are in the 80s and 90s. But you still just you want to keep track of your actual soil temperature, or otherwise if you stunt them, they're not going to do well. And especially peppers, if it's under plus 10, the plant will be stunted. It'll just stop growing. So it will produce peppers, but they'll be smaller and fewer because there's not as much plant growth. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. At the beginning, until they germinate and start coming up, we miss the tops of these trays until all of the seedlings are up, and then we start bottom watering to promote the roots to grow down. So lots of people like to top water, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your roots are growing down then. And if you're planting multiple into one of these, which we've also done that, you just want to be careful. You would still wait until they have their first set of true leaves, and then you can just kind of moisten your soil, and then you can just pull them out. And typically at that stage, they just have like one main root going down or a few, but they haven't really branched out, so they actually pull apart very easily. And then you would just put them each into their own container at that point. We don't feed or fertilize, so we don't use an actual starter soil mix that's being heat treated or anything like that. We use potting soil that has worm castings in it, so it helps feed the plants. Before they get their first set of true leaves, they're actually just living off of their seedling leaves. That's the first ones. They're kind of more rounded shaped. And then once they drop those, that's when they will need nutrients. So your soil and your lights and all of those things for them to actually start producing properly. Yeah, I think that's basically it. We've got a lot of these trays ready to go, so I should get off here and start seeding.